Hello and welcome to the Gallery of Modern Art here in Brisbane for today's GoMA Talks conversation presented in partnership with ABC Radio National. I'm Antony Funnell and I present the Future Tense program on Thursday mornings on RN. Welcome also to all of those who are joining us via the live webcast this evening. And I'll just let you know, just in terms of housekeeping, that we will be taking questions at several points during tonight's proceedings. So if you've got a question, there will be a couple of microphones, one at either end, so just signal to those people if you've got a question that you'd like to ask. And we also have a Twitter feed up and running, so if you're interested in tweeting, whether you're in the audience here or you're out there watching or listening, the hashtag is #GoMA Talks, all one word. This series of conversations is being held in conjunction with the gallery's current exhibition, which is called Surrealism, the Poetry of Dreams. And the actual name of this particular event is Novel Worlds, What Does the Written Word Have to Say? And the actual name, and our aim rather, today is to explore, I guess, the process of writing and where that form of expression comes from. So, let me introduce our guests for tonight, our panellists, and join me in welcoming them on stage. I'll just run through the names. Down this end we have Noel Mengel, the chief music writer for the Courier Mail. He's also the author of the novel RPM, which won the 2010 Queensland Premier's Literary Awards for Best Emerging Fiction. Next to me here, don't want to steal any applause. Next to me is Chrissy Canaan. She's the author of the sexual memoir Affection and also the soon-to-be-released erotic adventure called Triptych, which comes out in October.
Yep.
So. Lucas Taylor is an interactive writer-director for the Emmy and BAFTA award-winning multi-platform development company called Hoodlum, which is based here in Brisbane. Lucas. And last but not least, Dave Graney, the ARIA-award winning singer-songwriter. And Dave has just recently released a memoir of his time in the music industry, which is called 1001 Australian Nights. So there are our panelists for tonight. Chrissy Canaan, I'd like to start with you first of all. And surrealist art is often evocative, it can be inventive, confronting, and even at times just outright rude. And it occurs to me that that pretty much sums up your form of personal expression, your form of writing, doesn't it?
It often is. I have a wide palette, but more and more these days I tend to be writing about sex, sexuality, and particularly perversity, which I'm really interested in, which are the areas of sexuality that people don't necessarily speak publicly, the things that we like to keep private. I like the idea that those private things are really the core of who we are as human beings, and I think art is about expressing who we are as human beings, and sex is it, really. When it gets down to it, human sexuality is the reason for our existence, I think.
So Triptych will be a good purchase?
It will be very rude.
You just set up very high expectations, I have to say.
Very, very rude.
That's what we want to hear. Dave Graney, many of the surrealist artists, they first started their careers as poets. A lot of them started as poets and then branched out into visual art. I've often thought of music as a form of poetry. What was it that originally attracted you to writing music?
Well, my book, you said, was like my adventures in the music industry, but my book is about my music life and a world that I wanted to have a life, a music life, and a music life is different. It's kind of took me a book to try to explain it, but when I was young, I was into music, and music was not in the house. You know, music is ubiquitous nowadays. It's everywhere. You can't escape it. It's ridiculously you know, you can't get away from the Beatles. I spend every day trying to get away from the Beatles, but they get in there, and so it was a hidden world you would find outside of the house amongst your teen friends, and it was an underworld, and I got into punk rock music, and that was like a rebellion within music itself, and it was very exciting, and it revealed a world of nothing, and I loved it, you know, and here I am nowadays, yeah. So my book is more about my life as a player, and you know, in this field of battle, you know.
I'd like to get into the, I suppose, the specifics of that sort of process of writing, but just briefly, I mean,
Right.
Was it difficult? You know, you're used to writing songs, but was it
Right.
difficult then turning your hand to a book?
Well, I was full of things to say and scores to settle, because I love music books written by musicians, and there's very few, and there's a really great one by Miles Davis called Miles. And if you take the word motherfucker out of that book, it loses 200 pages. And it's full of personal invective, like he's this white jazz guy you had to play with, like, here's me with Symphony Sid, one motherfucker I never liked. And but there's another one by Mez Mesrau, who was a dope dealer to Louis Armstrong. And Charles Mingus, the great jazz player, wrote an autobiography, Beneath the Underdog, where he introduces himself as three people, you know, and then you hang on from there. One's writing this book, one wants to fix you up, and one's somewhere else watching you, and it's brilliant. They articulate things and empathy for the life of a musician that, you know, it's like a boxer writing a book. They know what it's like to be punched, and you know, I love books like that. So I wanted to add my voice to that sort of crowd. Mm-hmm. So I had things to say, and you know, it carried me along.
Scores to settle.
That's right. Yeah.
Noel Mengel, music as well. As a music writer for the Courier Mail, you know, somebody whose job is all about the appreciation of music. You're also a writer, of course, as we mentioned before, but just in terms of your craft in writing about music, is the language of a song as important as the actual sound of a song, do you think?
I've got no idea what the answer is to that question. It's all important. Everything's important. Sometimes in a song, it's not what's said, it's how it's said. It could be splish splash, I'm having a bath, or yakety yak, or, you know, some things just sound great. And sometimes people introduce poetry to music, of course, starting with Dylan and many others. But it's not so much what goes down on the written page, as Dave well knows, has learnt many times. You know, sometimes things just sing great and sound great, and that's all part of the song. So I was thinking about all those things. As Antony mentioned, I've been a journalist at the Courier Mail for 20 years, and it was driving me mad. So I just had to do something else. That I just had all this other stuff in my head, and I wanted to get it out. Unlike Chrissy, there's no sex in my book. It's all about adolescent yearning for it. But like Dave, I'm from a country town, and I wanted to get out of there. I think, like Dave, I was galvanised by hearing the Sex Pistols too. There's a bit of that in there. But music, I wanted to set it in 1984, a period before a lot of digital and other innovation, when people had time to be bored, and when music was I think more special because it wasn't everywhere and for free. So those are some of the things I wanted to consider in the book.
All right, and Lucas Taylor, we're often told that we live in a very visual world. Certainly vision seems to be all around us, that the whole visual experience. Your work with Hoodlum really, though, in a sense, it's about combining the visual and the written, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think just to give some sort of background, what we do at Hoodlum, we're a multi-platform production company, and so what that sort of basically means is that we tell stories across multiple platforms, so across more than one form of media, be it TV, social networks, websites, print media and things like that. So, yeah, I think we do live in a very visual world and we tell very visual stories. I started as a screenwriter, so the visual obviously is very important with that. But what we're doing with the multi-platform is we're telling visual stories, but I think we're also telling interactive stories. Interactivity is a big part of where we're going. So it's about actually engaging the audience and physically getting them involved in the story and giving them a hand in it. And that's sort of, yeah, that's the sort of next step that we're going there.
So the distinction really between, say, the written and the visual, the one that I've just given, isn't really, it's not, there isn't a distinction in that sense. They are together. I mean, I know you talk about the term as multi-platform storytelling. Mm-hmm. So it's all together, it's an encompassing thing.
Yeah, it is hard to put just a single definition on it, but there's visual elements. We may start with a project. To bring it back to a real world example, the project that I'm currently working on is a television show called Slide, filmed here in Brisbane for Foxtel, and we co-produce that with a company called Playmaker Media, and that's really sort of the pinnacle of what we've been doing at Hoodlum with multi-platform. So it's a 10-part television show at its core, but it also has an online interactive graphic novel, so highly visual elements there. But each character in the show also has a Twitter feed, and they're tweeting in character to the fans. So there's this real extension of the world of the TV show, which is the more traditional form of media that we understand, with all these new technologies and all these new platforms to tell more of the story and to get more of that world and more of the characters across to the audience. So yeah, it is a jumble of images and words and
a challenge, I would imagine, sometimes.
Oh, indeed, yes. It's been a sharp learning curve for me, as I said, coming from screenwriting into this, and it's writing in a world where, with the influence of all those new technologies, where things are changing overnight. It's hard to imagine that Facebook and YouTube and things like that have only been around for 5 or 6 years, but they have. And who knows what the next one around the corner is, and we bring that into what we do at Hoodlum. So,
Chrissy Canaan, in terms of your work, your motivation, what is it that drives you to write? You've spent a long time around books in a bookstore. What was it that made you want to actually take up paper and pen, or I guess you could say the laptop?
I have been writing. It was one of those things, I think, the classic story of a writer who discovered some really good people very early. When I was a very young child, I lucked upon Ray Bradbury, who is a classic science fiction writer, and I found him at a very young age and fell in love with language. Was the thing that I fell in love with when I read his work, and then was hungry, as some children are, to read more things, but not just more things that were being sort of spoon-fed to me. I was wanting to leap over that and read things that put words together, that gave me ideas that I hadn't thought of myself. And so for me, the urge to write is not only to express what I'm feeling or what I have inside myself, but to try and challenge that and to try and express things that I don't understand yet. And that really is the motivation for the reason why I keep writing. Otherwise I would have written a book, put it out there, been really happy. It's got a lot of media, it's got a lot of sales, that's great, I'm happy, I'll stop. But for me, it was more about the fact that there is so much in the world that I don't understand, and the way I make sense of it, it's almost like my clay, and I'm kind of building a picture from there, so I do have to engage with things I don't understand.
So it is, in a sense, an extension of you, isn't it, then?
It is. It's really a tool for me to go out and play with the world, I suppose. And so the way that I do it, other people have different ways of doing it. My family are visual artists, so they all kind of do that visually. I know people who, do it through music, but I need to go out, experience something I don't understand, and then bring it back home and sit there with a paper or with a laptop and really struggle with it from there.
Noel, there's a tweet which I might get you to respond to. The person has tweeted, Noel, Does that mean the words take on different meaning if on paper versus song?
Oh, everybody's free to interpret any way they like. That's why writers don't want to particularly explain their songs, and why a poet doesn't want to explain. It's for everybody's own interpretation. I think it's out there, and I try to define art, and I can't. But it's kind of when you have to make that leap to something, when you see a great painting or read a great poem or see a well-made pot or something, or read a great book, you kind of make a leap to that world. And that's a very personal thing, isn't it?
Probably closer to theatre if you read a Samuel Beckett's play like Endgame or something, and it seems so inarticulate if you're by yourself reading it and you don't have the skills or you're not receptive. But if you see a great couple of actors at the end of Endgame or something, or Waiting for Godot, and he's saying inarticulate things you could hear on Neighbours, like, so, on we go, so, on we go. And the repetition and the great actors' voices and the staging, just is quite incredible, the skills that someone can bring to it like that. Words and music songs, yeah. I like to, if I could say, like, there was a song by Muddy Waters in late 1940s, when the world was full of, quite, like professional songwriters who wrote for public arena, and they're quite guarded in what they said. But in the black American world, the language was freer because not everybody was listening. And Muddy Waters worked on a farm, and he came out with a song, I'm a man. And he said, I'm a man. And he lived in a world where everybody called him boy, and it was continual humiliation. Boy, do this. And he said, I'm a man. And in the 60s, it was discovered and done by young white guys in the UK, and they go in these squeaky voices, I'm a man, I'm a man. It's quite pathetic, but there's a difference between the cultural kind of, weight that they had on it, I've heard it said by many people, writing, whether it's a book or whether it's a song, there's a vulnerability in writing. Is that something that, because you are putting a part of yourself out there, is that something that you feel? Depends what you're doing. There's a book I love, an Australian book by two women writers, called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by M. Barnard Eldershaw. Two women who collaborated on a book in the late 40s about Australia in the future. And a man's written a book in the future about the world of the 1940s, and he's reading it to a friend, and it's stories within stories, and the man's listening to him, and they're sitting on a roof in the 21st century. And he talks about how happy he is, how he was when he was writing the story, and the happiness. He had the story in him, and he was consumed with it. Mm-hmm. And then when it was finished, it was like falling over a cliff, and it was no longer his, and profound depression came upon him. Writing would be full of that kind of roller coaster of emotion, I'm sure people would experience, as well as when you're in the thick of it, trying to do it, and days when you think you're great, and then many more days when you think you're really terrible.
Right. Noel, picking up on that point, that it's yours, it's your product, your baby, if you like, but then there is a point where suddenly your words, your language is no longer yours, it's shared by this bigger group.
Yeah,
how intimidating is that?
I never gave it a moment's thought or let it enter my head. Just going back to some of the things we discussed, and especially in fiction, I think writers write because they're unhappy if they're not writing. And songwriters write songs because they're not happy if they're not writing songs. There's a compulsion to do it. Question was?
About the, I don't know, I can't remember what the question was. No, it was about the fact that it's yours, but then you have to give it away.
Yeah.
And other people have different ideas of those characters. They suddenly are theirs as well, aren't they?
No, I was perfectly fine with that. think having been a journalist for a long time, and had worked in a magazine editor and had worked in publishing for a long time, so I'd seen both sides of it. So I was, and I'm an older guy. I was 52 when I was writing that book, and it's a long time to wait to write a novel. I realised I knew it was my shot. I just had to do it. I did not let myself think about the end product. I certainly didn't let myself think about getting it published or writing synopsis or ringing agents or people reading it. And in fact, I think there's a line in the book where the mentor figure, who's one of the characters, says, if you care about that, you're not really a writer. You're not going to cut it. You just have to do it because it's you and it's authentic to you. I think a thing I've picked up, I've interviewed musicians for 30 years, and I guess it's like every other world, a lot of really successful musicians, a lot of really good musicians, are really bright, interesting people, and they find their way up in the world is through their creativity, and I've just loved talking to all those people about that stuff. So I did think a lot about creativity and what people had said to me about it, and I'm pretty sure it's the same with all of them. There's a compulsion to do it. Sure, maybe some people are trying to write some pop hits, and then of course there's songwriters who are working in that whole pop game, and there's some great work done by Bacharach and David and many others. But I think most of the great creativity, people aren't thinking about the end product. They're just doing it and they want to get it out of their heads.
Just a reminder, you're at the Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, GoMA, and this is part of the GoMA GoMA Talks series, and our topic today is novel words. What does the written word have to say? I'm Antony Funnell, and I'm chairing the discussion tonight. We'll take some questions in just a minute or so. So if you want to ask a question, please signal one of the people with the microphones. Before we go to that, Chrissy, we've got a question here. Somebody's tweeted, do you find your creativity varies depending on the medium you use to write? Now, the question relates to laptop versus paper.
Yeah,
but you also write blog versus book. So maybe start with the laptop versus paper and go from there.
I think it's funny because I write a whole lot of different things. Not all of my work is as rude as as the two books that are about to go out in the world. They're just the ones that everyone's really interested in. Right. And I've got a whole lot of these kind of very introverted novels that are sitting there, like, sort of gestating, and some of them are with the publisher. But those ones, I tend to really like to handwrite and to write on paper, and I like to do it. My best writing time is very, very early in the morning when I'm not quite awake. Mm-hmm. So I suppose, going to see the Surrealist exhibition, the idea that dreams and that ideas come out of dreams is very resonant to me, because a lot of the time I'll find that I fall asleep as I'm handwriting, and I'll think that the work that I've done is terrible because, I haven't really been awake. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, haven't had my coffee yet. But then later I'll go back to it and I'll find that that's actually some of the best stuff that I've ever written, was very much by hand. I might not be able to read it again when I look at it because my writing was terrible. But it does actually change, because when you're working on a computer, the temptation is to go back and edit as you're working. Yeah. And sometimes that can be a killer for writing something as long as, a 120,000 word book, because suddenly you find you're just kind of working and reworking this tiny paragraph when you really need to just treat this as, stream of consciousness first draft, and then you can go back and sculpt. I was talking to Margot Lanigan on Twitter the other day, and she was talking about editing a book she's just been working on, saying how she lost 50,000 words in one fell swoop with the editor. And that's really what writing is like as well. It's like you're writing and your process is, on the computer or on the paper or whatever, and that's your first draft. But then you've got this thing which is like a big block of ugly clay, and sometimes the real art and craft of it is sculpting after you've created, to get rid of anything that's terrible and cut it back and shape it and make it into a beautiful sculpture, really. So that's the trick with things like, and even blogging. Blogging I treat a little bit like paper, because the blog that I wrote a blog post a day for about 3 years, I think it was. I wanted to write a new sexual story every day when I was working on my memoir. And I treated that as paper. I didn't actually edit anything. It was full of, you can go back there now, it's called www.furiousvaginas.com. And if you go look that up, you'll see old posts which are just my workings out. And so it's full of mistakes, grammatical errors. I let people comment on it, and people were often saying, "Where's your spell check?" But really, that was my paper, and that was just my working out.
Almost a test, in a sense, or testing out ideas, a sounding board.
And also becoming a little bit braver, because I knew that I was going to be releasing something that was not only very rude, but also revealing about my own sexuality and my sex life. And I wanted not to have to come to the time when you're facing the public and your book's there for the first time and people are going to be reading about what you like to do in bed. And, you know, to actually go, well, I've already read that on the blog a year ago.
Tell me something I don't know.
That's right. It just takes the fear out of it. And if you're frightened of something, I like to just put it out there, because the things that you're most frightened of normally are the things that are the most important to your writing. And so I like a blog. I like the fact that it's so immediate, because it takes, you know, it's like sometimes you can stand at the edge. I don't know, I've never bungee jumped, but I imagine you stand at the edge of something with the bungee cord attached to your leg, and you just don't want to jump because of the fear. But if you just run at it and jump, you know, you don't have time to be afraid. And that's what blogging does for me. I'm not sure if anyone else treats it quite as like that as I do, but that's how I treat my blog.
All right. Lucas Taylor, that idea of the different genres you work in, is one harder than the other? I mean, you're dealing with a whole lot of them simultaneously.
Yeah, well, I guess in relation to that question, does it affect your creativity? I think it's not so much it affects your creativity, but you definitely have your strengths as a writer. And so working across all those different platforms, I feel very comfortable going back to writing a standard script that I understand, you know, that I trained in and understand sort of a more traditional format. I remember the very first day I had to write, you know, a Twitter post for someone. I wasn't a big user of technology, and it was almost a moment where I said, "What is this Twitter? I've heard of it." And and I had to get to grips with that. And so I found that really challenging, writing, you know, 140 characters and you've got to tell a story. It's almost like that classic, you know, test of can you write a story in 7 words or 5 words. So that sort of really stretches me. Recently on Slide, we created these interactive graphic novels, which was a whole new leap in terms of writing on a different medium for me, because we were thinking visually, but we were constrained by how many panels we could tell the story and how many images, and you're constrained in that in any form you're writing in. But this really drilled down, and it really challenged how can you tell a great engaging story with characters who we've seen on TV, and you know they've got these beautiful, talented actors behind them bringing your story to life. How can you change that and still make it an engaging and an interesting story on the page? So, yeah, I mean, I do think that changing mediums, certainly for me, is very challenging and does affect you, but it's also really exciting, and it pushes you forward.
I'd like to actually take that point and in a second come back to that idea of the change. You know, have we changed, I guess, in a way, the way we write as citizens in general, not just people who do what you do, because of new technologies, I guess. But have we got a question? We might take a question first if we've got one. We've got a person down here. If you've got a question for a particular person on the panel, please fire away.
Please forgive me if I misquote anybody, but Chrissy spoke about play and then more recently bungee jumping. Dave spoke about performance. Lucas has spoken about a platform to dive off. And Noel has spoken about just doing it. Well, I think they're really important things that you've got in common. And part of what I wanted to ask about is that words, are they just the beginning, one, of self-expression, but two, communication with the audience? That it's not enough just to have the black and white on the page, that it's a relationship. One, a relationship with yourself, two, a relationship with the audience. And it's got to be vital. It's not passive, it's not black and white, it's a rainbow. And you guys are the ones who are creating it. We're the ones enjoying it, but interactivity, we want to give back a bit as well. So that's, I hope there's some question marks in that for you to respond.
I was going to say, what's your question?
Yeah, it's not, are words enough is there more to writing than what I want to say or what I want to ask?
All right, who wants to pick that up?
I could pick that up.
Chrissy,
I really believe that it is an interaction between you and the audience, but sometimes the trouble would be if you were thinking about that as you were doing it. I really think that it's important when you're writing specifically. Lucas will probably think something different because I know interactive media is a really different form. But when you're writing on, and it's going to be on the page, your first relationship is to the work on the paper. Your second relationship is to your editor or your publishing house if you've got that, and then that person is helping you communicate to a wider audience. Because if you were writing and you thought about the audience as you were doing it, I think that it would really stop you, because it's not just one audience, it's hundreds of people out there with hundreds of different needs, and if you're trying to please the people who are reading, that's where you come unstuck. And I think that it's really important that the readers bring the actual interactive thing in a book, a paperback, or whether it's read on the iPad or your computer, is that the audience brings something to that book. You're presenting something, and then the audience is bringing their own stuff, and that's where the magic happens. It's once the book's gone, it's out of your hands, you can't fix it or change it, but then it's the reader's book to read and to make of it what they will.
Dave Graney, picking up on that, how important is the audience for you in the writing process? Are you actually thinking about the audience, or are you writing for yourself primarily?
Are you talking about, in regard to my book, I was also thinking about the culture, rock and roll kind of small culture I come from, and a lot of the book's ruminating on finding a voice, because as a singer in Australian music, you're using American structures, chords, changes, and often an American patois. And the same sort of dynamic happens in Australian hip-hop. They have this continual dynamic questioning that makes it quite, thrilling in a way to keep it honest and real. But Australian culture, in a way, hates artistic kind of, turns. They hate artists and in general, And so I was ruminating on things like that in my book, and it's also a personal story that I was writing. And so if ever anybody thought of writing a personal story, you start to think, what if such and such reads this, and you wake up in the night, with the heebie-jeebies, thinking, oh my God, that person's going to read it. So that never kind of ends. And but in a way, I was also writing about being a young musician, and when you're a young musician, you're not talking about yourself, or you're talking about the time you find yourself in a collective, and you join a collective and you become a person within it. Eventually, you have to fly away from it, but so I wanted to write about my experience of being in a collective as if it was a dream, because most linear stories of rise, the rise and fall of, the coming into public, notice of an artist or something is boring. It's the same story over and over. But I thought the story of the dreamlike state where people are kind of blindly searching for themselves with others, and it's very intimate. It's like a family, a group of, late teens, early 20s. They're feeling for the world and themselves. So I tried to write in a mythic, heroic style, and I was afraid that my close friends, some who I'm talking about, would think I was disrespecting them, because I'm not naming them. I was talking about them as large mythic characters that I was leaning on, and so I was very happy that it created no kind of friction in my life, because I didn't want that. But I was trying to tell a story in a certain way. So I hope that answers your question.
Do we have another question? Yes, down here.
Thanks. Dave, you mentioned earlier when you talked about writing and singing that you're a player in this field of battle.
Yeah.
And I suppose just wanting to understand just what that means, and if there's I suppose for all writers and singers that you have to go through, it's like a battle with your beliefs to
heroic
create.
battle. Yeah. Well, it's just the way that music things are portrayed, especially much more crudely nowadays with television talent shows, and it's always the moment of triumphant acceptance by the world. Everybody's cheering, the room's up, and the triumphant moment. But the reality, every performer knows, is it's a firefight in a dense, close jungle situation, where at any moment the audience will turn on you and kill you, and. And you laugh, but it's true. Everybody knows that everybody's been in that situation. People are fickle, and you're also shamefully in the game of searching for their attention, and their attention's going to wander, and it kinks you and makes you into a fool. And you have to embrace all of this stuff, which, like, you're a fool. You have to embrace being a fool. You have to embrace your own shameless mugging for people's attention, moment by moment, like a psychotic, like Bert Newton, that kind of large, light entertainment psycho like that. And I like Bert Newton, I respect his skills, but I'm just saying that's the sort of scene you're in. It's perverse, but it's recognised and people are admired for their skills in a scene, but it's full of sham, fakery, and formalised stupidity, but you have to really love it, and it's talked up to a ridiculous degree that it's hard, but any idiot can do it really. So you have to know all that as well. Yeah, so that's what I mean by it's a fight. It's internal fight as well as punching on with the world.
And another question? Do we have another one? Yes, just up in the middle there. I'll just mention #GoMA Talks is the hashtag if you want to send a tweet.
Hi everyone, thank you. I'm really enjoying the talk. My question is directed to Chrissy, if I may, please. As an author of erotica, I'm just wondering if you ever considered publishing your work under a pseudonym.
No, but interestingly, I'm sort of clearing my palette from the last book, which is very rude, as I said, and I'm kind of cleaning it by writing a kids' book at the moment, aimed at the I'm thinking it might be 10 to 12-year-old market, and I may release that under a pseudonym. So I never
That'd
really...
be a birthday mix-up gone wrong.
Yeah, no, I want the book by Chrissy Canaan. Excellent. Or, the kids at school get given that great kids book and they go, hey, I'm going to read everything else by that woman. Thanks, Mum. So I never wanted to write my erotica under or sex stuff under a different name because that kind of embodies me. Like if you know me as a person, and I suppose my memoir kind of outs myself as that, sex is very, very important to my life, not in terms of, having to have sex every minute of the day, but thinking about it and thinking about our relationship to everything in a very sexual way. Because I think I really do think that sex is kind of like the underlying thing to being human and communal. And so I never wanted to kind of step away from sex, so that's why I've written that under my name. The kids' book, something different.
Seeing as we're at this Surrealist exhibition, do you think it's interesting? A lot of the Surrealist, the man who invented the word Surrealist, Guillaume Apollinaire, the critic and writer, he made a pretty penny on the side by writing erotic books that were sold, and then he did his great world-shaking poetry, and there was a publisher of erotica in France who used the money from that world to publish Henry Miller and people like that. Why isn't there that crossover in our culture? What are these porn barons doing with all their dollars?
I know. Well, I'm hoping that the work that I do that's erotic will kind of fund these kind of dark, kind of disturbed narratives that I write.
Could your book sit on a Club X kind of counter and get more penetration into the market, do you think? Or?
Well, maybe. I'm actually, I don't step away from the pornographic. I
Yeah.
actually think that pornographic expression is really, really important. So
course.
the new book is full of, expletives and words that you would see in porn.
Yeah.
But I think that if someone who was expecting one of those kind of black and white grimy
Yeah.
magazines picked it up, they might just lose interest in exactly
Too
what
many
they were
words.
doing, and they might continue to read. I'm hoping they do it at the same time. I'm hoping there's kind of
And would the label be a problem?
multitasking.
You know, the sense that you've written a book, it's a book, but once it has, an X on it, it's suddenly, it is pornography, isn't it? It's viewed in a very different way, regardless of the words that are in there, the language that you've used.
Yeah, that's right. And some pornography, you can luck on some pornography, which is amazing. So Georges Bataille, I think is how you say it.
Yeah.
His The Story of the Eye is one of my favourite books, and that is probably the rudest book I've ever read in my life.
They'll use French though, isn't it?
It's quite amazing, and yet it's so, as well as being, arousing and erotic, you kind of read it and it just you feel these little explosions of thoughts going off in your head, because he's putting these things together in a very sexual way, but that you'd never expect to be together, and that's where it becomes exciting for me.
All right, we might leave it with the smut for the moment. You thought this was going to be about art or about words, about writing. Noel, the effect of technology on the way we write.
Yeah.
You're not only a writer in the sense of a book, but you're also a journalist. And technology has changed, particularly in the field of journalism, it's changed language quite significantly, hasn't it? I'm thinking just even of headlines now have to be optimised for search engines. They can't be as poetic or as witty or as clever as they used to be. Could I get you to talk to some of that?
Yeah. Can I point out, one day in 1978, I was a public servant for a couple of years, and it just about killed me. I was so boring. I knew I had to get out of there. And then I went and studied the arts and played in bands and did a Bachelor of Arts in Toowoomba, and one day I worked on the Toowoomba Chronicle in Hot Metal, last day of Hot Metal, which is linotype operators running around, galley boys. It was Dickensian. It was amazing that day. But one day, and that was it. It was replaced by modern printing presses, or more modern, and the first clunky computers. But yeah, for years I wrote on beautiful old clunky typewriters until I was in Sydney in about '85.
That does make you think a lot more before you start typing things out.
Yeah, I love the physical aspect of type. It's been years since I've used a typewriter. And I must get myself one.
It's a good font. You can
Yeah,
get
it's
an American typewriter.
It's a nice looking font. I didn't do a lot of longhand writing, but I did some longhand writing in my novel, and I love that. I know David Moyes writes longhand. I know plenty of other writers. In my days as a cricket writer, when I was editor of Australian Cricket magazine in 1985, I used to sit up in the press box in the Sydney Morning Herald next to Bill O'Reilly, Bradman's contemporary, while Bill wrote his column longhand in his pad. And then he'd take it down and somebody else would ring it through. So that was a very long time ago. So yes, technology has changed a great deal. It's a dizzying pace of change for journalists, and sometimes it is hard to keep up. I just think in writing a novel, there's all kinds of ways. Sometimes it comes out in a torrent, you have to get it down. Sometimes it's nice to ride your push bike down to the beach with a pad and scribble.
There have been some good books written about writers' practices. Ramona Caval did a really good book interviewing writers, how they worked and that sort of thing. And
Speaking volumes.
yeah.
There is a truth, though, isn't there, that in the modern world we now have shorter attention spans, that we find it harder to sit and read, perhaps because of our devices, the sort of devices that we use to read. Is that true, do you think? I mean, it's also said about television, but
It's all Lucas's fault.
it's also said about television, but some of the most popular TV programs in recent years, things like The Wire, have been very long-form television. What about novels? What about?
I think The Wire is a great example where we like to say, new mediums and technology are maybe shortening our attention spans, but then something like The Wire comes along, or the things that HBO are producing, which for years and years the pinnacle of what you could achieve in film and television was to be writing and producing features. But if you look at something like The Wire and you've got, a story that's spanning all those episodes, that's, 10 or 13 episodes, hour-long dramas, and you're weaving a story from the start to the finish of that, you need a really strong attention span to be able to commit to something like that. So
the writers of that talked about how great it was, knowing they had that long to spin out the story, and they could go into the boring, mundane parts of the interaction in the office they couldn't do in a movie.
Yeah, you can see that. They're allowed to, it's a great thing for character to develop. They're allowed to push that. And I think you see it with novels, to a degree. To say that we have a shorter attention span, one thing I've noticed with contemporary literature compared to sort of some of the great novelists of the past, I think in some senses a lot of novels are getting longer and longer. So
are we actually do we underestimate how sophisticated people are at deciding what they want to do, how they want to read, how much they want to read, depending on the different medium?
Possibly.
I think it's perception of what people are like, and it's very difficult to perceive things when so much of people's activity is hidden and interior, and there are much fewer public sensational events. Like many people watch The Wire and that, but they're at home watching it, and they're not out at. It's not like a big premiere night. You can see, whip ups and public spectacle of mass experience. It's very interior and in people driven into their homes in cave-like situations.
If this was the case that our attention spans were so short we couldn't deal with long form, short stories would be much more popular. I work in a bookshop and I love the short story form. I think that sometimes, 1 or 2 pages can say what a whole novel is rabbited on for like 300 pages to say. And if it's done, or a poem, which I don't read poetry as much as I should, but that's what people talk about. A poem can kind of cut it down to its absolute essential. And if we didn't have a long attention span, then a poem or a short story would be the thing that people were grabbing for all the time. But in a way, the short form takes more attention because it's so compact and refined that we need to think about it for longer. We need to finish a short story and have an hour or 2 to just think about that. Whereas sometimes a novel, it's easy because we know it gives us a sense of, I can come back to that novel and I can just keep reading another chapter, and then when I come back, there's the familiarity. There's something kind of comforting about going, those characters will still be there when I finish work today or when I finish my swim.
I think what's changed in the world is so much white noise and so many people clamouring for our attention. Of course, people can think about things deeply. Otherwise, HBO is where it's at. But people from film want to be in TV now because that's a great format. But I guess people, I hate that word, time poor, but we've got a lot of people clamouring for our attention.
But somebody tweeted earlier on this point and said, in a world where everybody can publish online, in a sense, how do you sort the wheat from the chaff? How do you do that, Noel?
That's where you need a cultural institution, like people were cheering on, music, that, record companies are evil, but record companies were actually cultural, filters that help to shape things.
But filters are seen to be bad, aren't they?
They were talked down by the people who were spruiking the new technology, the iTunes, which is the one monolithic record company that's there nowadays. It's no better or worse than, I would rather, 20th Century Fox in 1940 than YouTube, as far as producing and employing lots of skills and that.
But I think there is a difference between... there is much more chance and opportunity now for people to get their stories out there, but a lot of what's on YouTube and a lot of what's out there isn't necessarily people, being artists or trying to sort of offer their voice to the world. Sometimes it's just a new form of expression, in the same way that singing in the shower was a form of expression. And I think we've come a long way now, and it's connectivity and communicating is become really valued. It's the technological advance of of our age of the last 10 years. And
How do you reconcile that with going to a mall where nobody interacts with each other at all? Out in public, in a mall, people don't talk or they're silent
But
kind of.
more and more they are. There's things that I'm really interested in a form
They're
of...
texting each other.
They text each other, but they also, there's
As they walk
stories that
past.
you can read only in, there's site-specific storytelling where you can actually only download a particular short story if you're in a restaurant. I'm really excited by that. I'm really excited by the idea of telling a story in a public space that, people can only read this if they come to a museum or an art gallery like GoMA, and then suddenly, what a wonderful venue for an erotic story, to stand in public in the middle of the Surrealist exhibition and be reading something that's, not really for public. That's beautiful, that connection.
So it opens up, doesn't it, then, in what you're saying, it opens up different experiences for the reader.
Yes.
Not every experience of, say, what you write is necessarily going to be the same for every reader in that kind of world.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that, yes, we are reading stories in public more now. So instead of walking down the road reading your book, like maybe we did when we were walking to school, now you can kind of read your Twitter feed or read your Facebook, and you actually are getting a narrative of a sort.
I find it very difficult to cheer on, new technology, because we're all just, it's all going to smash everything anyway, and I don't see why I should sit around cheering it on. It's been bad for music, really. It's it's no good.
It's just a new form, though. I don't think it's a bad
Atlantic
thing.
Records for 30 years was better than anything could be. I know time's passed it by, or whatever, but
There's just
those institutions, those cultural stacks, Atlantic Island, nothing has replaced them at all.
Lucas Taylor, we're talking about this, about the negatives, the positives, but it is still the case, isn't it, where the way in which our language is changing, the way in which we're accessing these different forms of media, that's still in a state of flux, isn't it? As you said earlier, all of this has really come on very quickly.
yeah, I think it has, and it is changing. There's been technological advances that have changed different mediums plenty of times before. We used to have silent films, and then we had talkies.
Silent films were much more international. Charlie Chaplin was a much bigger personality all over the world.
Well, I
than
don't think
anybody
we need to I'm not looking at the cultural demise, I'm sort of trying to think about it in terms of this is happening. And what we talked before about a question from the audience about connecting with the audience, and do you write for yourself and do you write for the audience? And I think it's different for different people. It's different for projects and different mediums. But if you're not, personally, I feel aware of the audience when I'm writing, and certainly I think a lot of those new technologies are making it much easier and much quicker and much more meaningful to engage with the audience and to give the audience a voice and to give them a role in certain forms of storytelling. And
You're talking of resonance, a reverberation that you feel when you're creating something. That's a word I would say. You're taking an awareness of a room that you're talking within.
yeah, I think it's not necessarily, it's a resonance as in, are you connecting with them from the work, or are you entertaining them? You talked before about, desperately seeking and craving attention through the work. The audience is always there. It's just bigger now, and it's got a bigger voice.
I don't think the audience should have a voice. They're there to listen and watch.
Now, we might just take this
How do you reconcile that? Sorry, how do you reconcile that with the seeking of attention and the looking for the audience?
I was just saying that's the illusion and the fantasy the performer or writer has to live with. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it's there, and it's a base energy that they're kind of coasting on. But you say the audience is always there. They're not always there. Often the room is empty. There's tumbleweeds blowing through.
I think we'll have to jump in here. We've only got a few more minutes, believe it or not, till we finish. Is there any other question? We could take another question if somebody's got a question. Yes, over there.
Kind of exactly the sort
If you could use the microphone, it is a bit hard to hear, sorry.
Right. Yeah, I suppose like in the end, it's the feelings and emotions that's created by the input, whether it's iPod, CD, vinyl, whatever the kind of things is about where it takes you in your experience. Like you come to something, does it change you internally or not? Does it enter into your psyche or not? So like words are kind of there, but like they have some kind of feeling that, and I suppose all that you've got particular, like I suppose what Chrissy does, I suppose that some of these things really do something totally in restructuring your mind, or are they just kind of just out there? And I suppose that's a question for me about what impact they actually have upon your person, that it's not just mere letters, but it comes into yourself.
I do think that no matter, Lolita is one of my favourite books in the world. I've read that in several different paperback editions. I read a hardcover edition of it, and I've read an electronic version. And the words don't change regardless of whether I'm reading it electronically or in hardback or in paperback. So for me, the transition, and I don't understand the music industry or how that works. I do understand that that the book industry is in transition and that publishing houses are struggling. But what is beginning to happen, and I think we're in a period of change, so it's a period of opportunity, but it's also a period where the audience is a bit confused because there is a lot of voices that are now out there on these different mediums online, or you can download a lot of electronic books that aren't coming through aren't any good and aren't coming through a publisher. Like you can write something tonight and you can whack it up on Amazon and someone can buy it and excellent, Bob's your uncle. But the people who say, I think out of these 1,000 books I've read, this one's the best one, and they're the people that you respect the taste, which is like the musical houses of old. These people are struggling at the moment, but there are new ones coming through, like McSweeney's, which is a publishing house that is embracing new technology, and people who love that brand know I'm going to buy a McSweeney's, whether it's on my iPad or whether it's in book form. Or
I love the sexuality in Patrick White's Voss, because it's in such a world of where sex is not everywhere and people aren't talking about it, and the leaps they have to make to talk and express themselves is great. But I love to hear about things that seem to happen out there for no reason. I was in Geelong a couple of months ago and went to a T-shirt shop, and this stoner was selling T-shirts, and I said, what are the kids into around here? He goes, yeah, 18-year-old kids around here come in. And he sells tons of T-shirts of The Big Lebowski, anything to do with it. And he said, yeah, kids around here, 17, 18, they get stoned and watch it 2 times a week. And they come in here and they just talk in lines from that movie. I think that's nuts.
Now, we're going to have to wrap it up.
I mean, I think it's great. Irrational things happening out there. I really, that things make me happy.
We're going to have to wrap it up. So just very quickly, only a couple of minutes, just final questions. Dave, let's just start with you. I mean, what's the most interesting part of the writing process for you? What do you actually, some of it must be a chore, but there must be some part of it as well that you really
Well, I do love to read books, and I love to be inspired by books, and like Australian writers like David Foster, who wrote a brilliant book last year called Sons of the Rumour, and his retelling of the Arabian Nights in an Australian kind of context, and I just love discovering his work, and I've been reading a lot of Patrick White over the last few years, so I do love to read lots of books. A.E. Coppard, this 1920s British writer. But I do like writing, and but it's a fierce struggle to try and express yourself. Depends what your skills are, and I by no means think I'm highly skilled at it. But I think it's great when you have a feeling or an idea that you think you've got something, and you try to express it, and you feel you have a little bit. Mm-hmm.
Lucas, what for you is the most difficult part of writing? What do you grapple with?
I think just I love picking up on what Dave just said, that feeling of when you get an idea and you think you're onto something, and whether it's come from from life or from listening to music or watching a film or reading the words, that's an amazing feeling, and that's one of the things I love the most about writing. One of the things that I think I grapple with is more like that battle where you've got to get down into the craft of it. And I love that battle, but it is, it is difficult, and you've got to continue at it.
Chrissy Canaan, you're writing for other people, for as big an audience as you would hope to have, but in the process, it's a very solitary thing, isn't it? It's just you and a laptop, and you're trying to keep everyone away while you're getting it done. Yeah. How do you reconcile those two things?
I actually, it really appeals to my personality because I do go through, in my own personality, I go through stages where I'm very gregarious and I like to have lots of parties and I like to be out and about and talking about things, and then I go through periods where the world frightens me and I want to lock myself in the room and not go out. And so writing actually is fantastic for that because it engages me when I'm in one of those periods where I just feel like I can't walk out and see the world. So that actually just fits my personality so well that I couldn't possibly do another type of job, I think, apart from that.
And final question, Noel Mengel, your novel RPM, how much of you is there in it, and did you have to strike a balance in your own head as to how many of your secrets, if you like, how much of you actually got onto the page?
There's a few secrets there, but they're all mixed up. So, look, it's a work of the imagination. Yes, I started with what I knew. I knew country towns. I knew kids desperately wanting to form bands and completely obsessed by music. I knew obsessive characters, those sort of mad obsessive characters you meet in country towns. So I wanted to write about all that. So no, I didn't worry about that balance. It's mostly a work of the imagination, but people who know me know it does bounce a bit off where I came from. That helped me write something I think that was quite authentic that people seem to like. I do know in the writing of it, some days when I was there, those were some of the very best days of my life, and I just want to keep doing it.
Well, look, thank you very much to everyone. Round of applause. Chrissy Canaan, the author of the sexual memoir Affection, and also the soon-to-be-released erotic adventure Triptych, so watch out for that. Dave Graney, the ARIA-award winning singer-songwriter, who's just recently released his memoir of his time in the music industry called 1001 Australian Nights. Lucas Taylor, who's from Hoodlum, which is an interactive multi-platform development company. He's writer and director for that company. And Noel Mengel, the chief music writer for the Courier Mail and also author of RPM. And as I mentioned at the beginning, he also won the 2010 Queensland Premier's Literary Award for Best Emerging Fiction. So another round of applause for them all, thanks. And special thanks to all of you, either out there in the audience or through the webcam, for your comments, for your attendance. The next GoMA Talks discussion in this series will be on Thursday, the 15th of September, and its theme is Mastering the Mind. Do our brains control our behaviour? It'll be hosted by my Radio National colleague Kate Evans, and we'd love to have you come and join us for that one as well. The details for that event and also for other events in this series are on the GoMA website, so if you want to check them out, go there and have a look. You can also, of course, look at the videos of previous discussion. Before you go, another housekeeping thing, before you go, there are limited copies out there of both Dave's book, 1001 Australian Nights, and also Chrissy's book, Affection. So if you're interested in purchasing one, you'll find them outside the door there. I'm Antony Funnell. That's all for tonight. Thank you for joining me, and good night.